The Mongol Empire conquered more land in 1 century than Rome did in 5. This was the work of nomadic horsemen, not a civilization of cities and roads. How did they possibly coordinate armies from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Vienna, sustaining campaigns for decades across impossible distances? The answer is not found in the sword or the bow, but in a hidden web, a logistical and communication network so sophisticated it became the true engine of conquest. By the end of this journey, you will understand the invisible systems that built history's largest land empire. We will uncover how relay stations moved information faster than any medieval thought possible, and how supply caravans crossed deserts that doomed other armies. This story reveals that the Mongols' greatest weapon was a network, turning the vast steppe into a superhighway of power. What does a 13th century postal system have to teach us about our own connected world? That mastery began with the land itself. To an outsider, the Eurasian steppe is an ocean of grass, a seemingly empty expanse stretching from the edge of China to the gates of Europe. But to the nomadic peoples who called it home, this was not emptiness. It was a vast, living map, a strategic foundation written in the language of river valleys, mountain passes, and seasonal pastures. Their entire existence was a lesson in logistics. Every spring and autumn, entire clans would move with their herds of sheep, goats, horses, and cattle across hundreds of miles. This was not a random wandering. It was a precise, communal migration following ancient routes to fresh grazing grounds, a constant exercise in moving people, animals, and possessions across immense distances with clockwork efficiency. They knew where the water sources were in the driest summer, which valleys offered shelter from the brutal winter winds, and how to traverse mountain ranges that appeared impassable. This lifelong training meant that when Genghis Khan unified the tribes, he was not just commanding warriors. He was mobilizing a society of expert movers. The challenge of moving 1,000 sheep to a new pasture is, in its fundamental principles, identical to moving 1,000 soldiers and their equipment. It requires planning, coordination, knowledge of the terrain, and an intimate understanding of your resources. The steppe taught them that distance was not a barrier, but a condition to be managed. Their resilience was forged by the land's scarcity. Surviving the harsh winters and unpredictable droughts meant learning to do more with less, to waste nothing, and to adapt instantly to changing circumstances. This cultural mindset of efficiency and mobility became the bedrock of their military machine, and at the center of this entire system was the horse. For the Mongols, the horse was far more than a battlefield asset. It was a complete logistical unit. A Mongol warrior would travel with a string of several horses, rotating them to keep each one fresh, allowing the army to cover distances that would cripple any European knight riding a single, heavily burdened warhorse. But the horse's role went beyond transport. On long campaigns when traditional supplies ran low, the mare provided milk, a nutritious and sustainable food source that traveled with the army itself. In extreme situations, a small amount of blood could be taken from a horse's neck for sustenance without causing it lasting harm, a practice born of steppe survival that allowed armies to operate in landscapes devoid of towns or farms. This profound symbiosis created a force where the line between soldier and supply train blurred. Every rider was self-sufficient, and the army moved with a speed and endurance that seemed supernatural to settled civilizations. They were not invading a foreign landscape. They were bringing their landscape with them, turning the entire continent into an extension of the steppe. This foundational understanding, this deep environmental intelligence, was the first and most critical component of their network. It was the reason they could even conceive of building an empire across continents. But speed alone does not build an empire. It requires control. To understand how the Mongols managed this, we must look at a system so advanced it functioned as the empire's central nervous system. This was the Yam, the Imperial Postal and Relay Network, established under the rule of Genghis Khan and dramatically expanded by his successors. The Yam was not a single road but a sprawling web of stations meticulously placed across the empire. Imagine a chain of outposts, each spaced roughly a day's horse ride apart, which could be 20 to 40 miles depending on the terrain. At every single one of these stations, a state-employed staff maintained a stable of fresh, rested horses, a rotation of expert riders, and stores of food and supplies. This simple, brilliant design eliminated the single greatest limit on medieval communication: the exhaustion of the messenger and his mount. An official courier carrying urgent news or a command from the great Khan himself would ride into a station at a full gallop. Without even dismounting, he would swing from his tired horse onto a fresh one, perhaps grab a bite to eat, and be back on the road in moments. His journey became a continuous sprint, relayed forward like a baton in a race that never ended. This system allowed information to travel at speeds that were simply unimaginable to the settled world, up to 200 miles in a single day. To put that in perspective, a message could travel from the Mongolian capital of Karakorum to the frontiers of Eastern Europe in about 2 weeks, a journey that would take an ordinary traveler many months. The authority to use this system was symbolized by a physical object, a Paiza. This was a tablet often made of gold, silver, or bronze, inscribed with orders and carried by the courier. The Paiza was a universal key. It granted the bearer the absolute right to demand a fresh horse, provisions, and guide services from any Yam station. It was a passport that overruled all local authority, ensuring that imperial messages flowed without delay or obstruction. But the Yam was far more than a military telegraph. It was the circulatory system of an entire imperial body. Spies and scouts used it to send back real-time intelligence about distant regions. Administrators used it to send tax records and decrees, governing provinces thousands of miles away with a surprising degree of direct oversight. It even facilitated trade and diplomacy, as merchants traveling with official permission could use the stations and foreign ambassadors were escorted along its routes. This constant, rapid flow of people and information is what truly bound the empire together. It turned a collection of conquered territories into a responsive, cohesive organism. A rebellion in Persia could be reported to the capital, and orders for a response could return before the local rebels had even finished consolidating their position. European visitors and Islamic scholars who witnessed the Yam in operation wrote of it with a mixture of awe and disbelief. They were witnessing a principle we understand all too well today, that information dominance is a foundational element of power. The Yam synchronized the Mongol war machine across continents, making the vastness of their empire not a weakness, but their greatest strategic asset. But a swift messenger network is only one half of the equation. An army, no matter how fast its riders, cannot conquer on information alone. It needs food, shelter, weapons, and tools, and it needs them consistently, often in landscapes utterly devoid of resources. This is where the Mongol system revealed its true genius, solving a logistical puzzle that had doomed countless armies before them through a concept known as the oortoo, the Great Caravan. The common image of Mongol hordes surviving purely by plunder is a myth born from the terror of their victims. In reality, they employed a sophisticated, layered supply system that blended individual self-sufficiency with large-scale, organized support. Long before a campaign began, the machinery of the oortoo would swing into motion. Vast trains of ox-drawn carts and 2-humped Bactrian camels, animals uniquely suited to the harsh continental climate, were assembled. These caravans did not follow the army. They were an integral part of its movement, a mobile supply depot crawling across the steppe. Their cargo was meticulously planned for endurance and nutrition. Reserves of air-dried meat, hard cheese, fermented mare's milk, and sacks of millet. They carried not just food but the spare parts of war, thousands of extra arrows, bundles of bowstrings, sheets of felt for instant shelters, and tools for repairing everything from saddles to wagons. This centralized supply line was the safety net, yet every Mongol warrior was also his own supply unit. As we discussed, his string of horses provided milk, a traveling source of sustenance. In his saddlebags, he carried a portable toolkit for maintaining his gear, a leather bottle for water, and a simple cooking pot. This dual system created incredible strategic flexibility. If the oortoo was delayed by a mountain pass or a river crossing, the army could continue operating for weeks on its personal resources. Conversely, when the great caravan caught up, it provided the bulk supplies needed for a long siege or a period of consolidation. This is what allowed them to perform the seemingly impossible, to campaign in the waterless deserts of Persia, the frozen highlands of Tibet, and the dense forests of Eastern Europe. A traditional European army of the period, reliant on a slow-moving baggage train and foraging from local villages, would have starved or mutinied in such environments. The Mongols, however, were not foraging, they were migrating. The oortoo was the direct translation of their nomadic way of life into a mechanism of war. It turned their entire civilization into a mobile fortress, capable of projecting power over distances that broke the logistical models of every settled society they encountered. The empire moved not as an invader in a foreign land, but as a homeland on the march, carrying its own world with it. A golden tablet carried by a dust-covered rider held more immediate power than a company of soldiers. This was the Paiza, the physical key that unlocked the entire Mongol network. While we've touched on its role, its true significance lies in how it transformed abstract imperial authority into an undeniable portable command. In a realm spanning dozens of languages and cultures, where a messenger from the capital might be utterly incomprehensible to a station master on the Caspian Sea, the Paiza spoke a universal language. Its material alone delivered the message. A wooden Paiza granted basic travel rights, a silver one signaled high priority and the bearer's important status. But a golden Paiza, often inscribed with the seal of the great Khan himself, was an object of absolute authority. It meant the empire's most urgent business was at hand, and to delay its bearer was to defy the Khan's direct will. This system ingeniously cut through the inherent friction of governing a continent. Imagine a local official at a remote Yam station. A stranger arrives speaking a foreign tongue, demanding his best horses and supplies. Without the Paiza, this could lead to confusion, negotiation, or even refusal. But with the flash of that golden tablet, all doubt vanished. The order was clear, immediate, and carried the full weight of the state. The station master provided what was needed without question, because the Paiza was the question and the answer all in one. It eliminated bureaucratic delay at the most critical choke points, ensuring that intelligence, commands, and key personnel flowed with relentless speed. The bearer wasn't just a traveler, he was a living extension of the Imperial Command Center, and the network bent to serve him. But the Paiza did more than expedite travel, it created a protected class of movement. Spies carrying sensitive information, tax collectors transporting treasure, engineers moving to a siege site, all operated under its protection. It was a passport that guaranteed safe passage and compelled assistance, turning the diverse and often hostile landscapes of the empire into a coordinated stage for imperial business. This reliability is what allowed the Mongols to administer with such surprising efficiency. A governor in Persia could send a report and trust it would arrive. An auditor from Karakorum could appear unexpectedly to review records, and a trade caravan with official patronage could plan a journey across thousands of miles with a degree of security unheard of in the medieval world. The Paiza institutionalized trust in a system, not just in a person. It meant that the empire functioned not on the personal loyalty of distant subjects, but on their ingrained obedience to a recognized symbol. It kept the logistical arteries of the Yam and the oortoo caravans clear under a single, streamlined protocol. In a very real sense, these tablets were the tokens that kept the heart of the empire beating in time, no matter how far its limbs stretched across the earth. Yet this entire system of speed and supply demanded more than horses and stations. It required minds that could build and repair the engines of conquest. The Mongol genius lay not in invention, but in a ruthless, pragmatic form of assimilation. When a city fell, the aftermath followed a chillingly consistent script. While the fate of soldiers and nobles was often severe, a specific group was systematically separated and spared: the artisans, the engineers, the skilled metalworkers and carpenters. These individuals were not seen as victims to be ransomed or burdens to be eliminated. They were precious resources, the living components of a mobile factory. Siege engineers from the advanced workshops of China and Persia found themselves often under duress, integrated directly into the Mongol military machine. They would travel with the armies, their knowledge packed up and carried across continents. When the Mongols arrived at the towering walls of a defiant city, these specialists would immediately set to work, directing laborers to construct massive trebuchets, mobile siege towers, and even early forms of gunpowder weapons, using local timber and materials. The army carried the blueprint, and the conquered expert provided the hands. This practice transformed the Mongol force from a cavalry-based power into a versatile, all-weather military capable of reducing the strongest fortresses in the world. But the integration went deeper than the battlefield. The logistical network itself was built on the labor of subjugated populations. Along the major routes of expansion, settled communities were given a stark new purpose. They were tasked by Mongol overseers with producing specific quotas of grain, felt, leather, and arrows, stockpiling these materials in designated storehouses. When a Mongol army approached, it did not arrive as a desperate force needing to scavenge. It arrived as a client collecting what was already produced for it. These territories became a chain of forward operating bases, their economic output seamlessly redirected to fuel the very army that controlled them. This created a self-perpetuating cycle of logistical imperialism. Each conquest provided not just plunder, but a new pool of specialized knowledge and a new region harnessed for continuous production. The resources extracted from one conquered land funded and supplied the campaign to conquer the next. It was a coldly efficient feedback loop, turning the wealth and skills of diverse civilizations into a single, unified instrument of expansion. The network, therefore, was not purely Mongol. It was a hybrid, a steppe core command system powered by the collected intellect and labor of half the known world. This reveals the empire's most enduring strategic insight. True power isn't about destroying what you find. It's about compelling everything you encounter to work for you. The ultimate test of their network was not on a map, but on the living steppe itself, in an annual ritual of survival that doubled as the empire's most vital training ground. This was the Nerge, the Great Hunt, a spectacle of coordination so vast it seemed to bend the landscape to its will. Every autumn, thousands of riders, from seasoned warriors to young boys, would fan out across hundreds of miles of grassland. They did not chase their prey, they orchestrated its movement, forming a gigantic, slowly tightening circle that could take days to close. Using a system of flags by day and signal fires by night, they communicated across impossible distances, maintaining perfect formation as they drove every animal, from hares to wolves to wild horses, toward a central point. To witness this was to see a living, breathing model of the Mongol army's signature tactic, the strategic encirclement. The skills were identical: the coordination of separate units across a broad front, the patience to maintain pressure without breaking the line, the final, decisive closure of the ring. The Nerge was a live fire drill without a single enemy present, where the penalty for a broken line or a missed signal was not defeat, but an empty larder for the clan. This immense exercise forged the individual discipline and unit cohesion that made Mongol armies so terrifyingly responsive on the battlefield, but the lessons went far beyond tactics. Once the circle closed and the hunt was complete, the true logistical training began. Facing a mountain of perishable meat, the entire community would set to work with practiced efficiency. Slices of flesh were cut thin and laid out to dry in the wind and sun, transforming into a lightweight, durable, protein-rich food known as oortoo. This preserved meat could last for months, even years, and became the foundational ration for campaigns. The process of butchering, processing, and distributing this sudden bounty was a masterclass in large-scale supply management. Every participant, from the Khan to the lowest herder, was immersed in the complete cycle of a military operation, from mobilization and maneuver to the critical work of sustaining the force afterward. The line between feeding a family and fueling an army vanished. A society that practiced this every year did not need to be taught how to campaign; they were already living it. The Nerge ensured that the entire population, not just a professional soldier class, maintained a state of perpetual readiness. It turned the challenge of survival into the blueprint for conquest, proving that their greatest strategic maneuvers were first perfected not against city walls, but in the endless grass, in the silent, coordinated dance of the hunt. Yet all this coordination and supply would have been directionless without a constant stream of knowledge. The Mongols understood that the fastest messenger in the world is useless if he carries bad information. To see their enemy, they built an intelligence network so pervasive it became the empire's true eyes and ears, long before a single arrow was fired. This system operated on multiple layers, each feeding into the other. The most visible layer was the scout, the skilled rider who could disappear into the landscape. Teams of these outriders would fan out dozens of miles ahead of the main army, not just looking for enemy forces, but mapping the terrain in meticulous detail. They noted the width of rivers, the firmness of the ground for heavy siege engines, the locations of springs and grazing land. This was tactical intelligence, gathered in real time to guide the army's immediate movements. But beneath this layer existed a deeper, more subtle web of human intelligence. Here, the unassuming merchant became a vital asset. Under the stable conditions of the Pax Mongolica, trade flourished as never before. Caravans moved with unprecedented security across the continent, and the Mongols actively encouraged this commerce. They offered merchants protection, tax exemptions, and even loans. In return, these travelers became the empire's unofficial informants. A silk merchant from Samarkand, chatting in a caravanserai in Anatolia, would hear local gossip about a weak garrison commander or a feud between noble families. A dealer in spices traveling to the markets of Kiev would observe the state of city walls and the mood of the population. This economic, political, and social intelligence was priceless. These merchants, often without even realizing the full consequence of their casual reports, provided a steady drip of information that built a comprehensive portrait of distant lands. This intelligence was systematically collected by Mongol officials at trading posts and yam stations, then raced back to command centers via the very postal system that protected the merchants' journeys. The result was a staggering strategic advantage. By the time a Mongol army mobilized against a target, its leaders often knew more about the region's internal divisions and vulnerabilities than the local rulers did. They knew which cities were wealthy and which were struggling, which rival princes could be bribed or turned against each other, and even the personal habits and temperaments of the enemy leadership. This allowed for campaigns of breathtaking precision. Why waste resources besieging a formidable fortress when you could exploit a political rift and have the city surrender through negotiation? Why attack a united front when you could use deception to split your enemies, then defeat them one by one? Their infamous feigned retreats, which lured opposing armies into carefully prepared traps, were not acts of desperation but performances based on a deep understanding of enemy psychology and terrain. Every movement of men and every shipment of supplies was informed by this constant flow of data. The logistical caravans did not head blindly into a region. They traveled to predetermined points where intelligence said they were needed most. This fusion of knowledge and logistics turned conquest into a science. The Mongols did not simply overwhelm with numbers, they dismantled with information, making their vast network not just a tool of movement, but a weapon of profound and targeted understanding. The Gobi Desert in deep winter is a place of silent, bone-chilling emptiness. Yet for a Mongol army, this was not a barrier, it was a calculated shortcut. Where other armies saw only hardship, the Mongols saw a logistical weapon. Their most famous campaigns were often launched in the dead of winter, a season when every settled civilization from China to Europe battened down and waited for spring. Their enemies assumed warfare was a fair-weather activity, a notion the Mongols exploited with devastating creativity. Frozen rivers, impassable in summer due to swift currents and deep water, transformed into perfect stone-hard highways. Their cavalry could now cross these natural moats with ease, moving in straight lines directly toward cities that felt secure behind their watery defenses. Snow-packed steppes offered firm, open ground for their mobile columns, while the forests and muddy roads of their foes became treacherous quagmires. The psychological impact was as powerful as the tactical one. An army appearing at the gates in the heart of winter when no army was supposed to move carried a terrifying aura of inevitability. It signaled a foe who was not constrained by the same rules of nature. This environmental intelligence was a form of deep cultural mapping. Crossing the Gobi itself required more than just courage. It required a library of knowledge passed down through generations. They knew the location of seeps and hidden springs that sustained the hardy Bactrian camel, an animal that could go days without water and whose thick fur insulated against the desert's nighttime freeze. Their caravans moved along ancient, invisible tracks, avoiding the soft dunes and sticking to the harder, gravelly plains. By mastering these routes, they could appear from directions considered impossible, emerging from the desert like a mirage made real, their supply trains intact. This allowed them to dictate the terms of every engagement. They could lure a pursuing army into a waterless waste, watching as its heavy knights and foot soldiers succumbed to thirst and exhaustion, while their own forces, prepared and provisioned, remained operational. They could choose to fight on ground that favored their horse archers, open plains where enemy infantry formations became slow, vulnerable targets. The supreme goal was always to invert the traditional burdens of war. By moving through landscapes others found hostile, the Mongols dramatically simplified their own supply needs. Their dried meats and mare's milk required no cooking fires that might give away their position, and their felt jur tents provided shelter that could be erected anywhere in minutes. Meanwhile, they deliberately maneuvered to magnify the logistical nightmares of their opponents. By cutting supply lines, poisoning wells, or forcing an enemy to march through territory the Mongols had deliberately stripped of resources, they turned an adversary's own army into its greatest liability. A hungry, cold, and exhausted force is a defeated force long before the first arrow is loosed. This was logistical artistry at its highest level, a cold calculation that treated rivers, mountains, and deserts not as obstacles on a map, but as active participants in the campaign. The landscape itself became a silent, relentless ally, extending the reach of the Mongol network far beyond the range of any messenger or caravan. It was the final, masterful layer of their system, proving that true dominion comes not from fighting against the world, but from learning how to make the world fight for you. This military precision found its perfect echo in a simple, brilliant number, 10. The Mongol army's legendary decimal command structure, organizing men into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, is often celebrated for its battlefield discipline. But its true genius was logistical. This was not just a way to arrange soldiers, it was a ready-made framework for moving and sustaining them. Think of it as a set of identical, interlocking containers. An arban of 10 men was responsible for its own 10 horses and basic gear. 10 arbans formed a zone of 100, which managed its own larger slice of the supply caravan. This modular design scaled all the way up to a tumen of 10,000, a massive but still coherent moving piece. This system created breathtaking efficiency. When a commander needed to allocate fodder for the horses, he didn't have to calculate for a chaotic mass of 15,000 individuals. He simply issued orders for 1 tumen, 5 mingans, and so on down the chain. Each unit leader knew exactly what his men needed and was accountable for maintaining it. This clarity streamlined everything from setting up camp to distributing the precious cargo from the oortoo caravans. But the system's resilience was its masterstroke. In the brutal reality of campaign, losses were inevitable. In a traditional army, the death or dispersal of key commanders could cripple an entire wing. In the decimal system, however, the structure itself was the commander. If a zone of 100 lost 30 men, the remaining 70 could easily be folded into another zone or reorganized into smaller, full-strength units. The logistical footprint simply adjusted because every unit operated on the same standardized plan. This modularity prevented a local setback from unraveling the entire army's supply chain. This same organizational logic was mirrored exactly in the support networks. The Yam postal stations were managed in a hierarchical web, with local overseers reporting to district administrators, creating a clean chain of accountability for maintaining horses and riders. The great oortoo caravans were almost certainly assembled and escorted using similar decimal groupings for their drovers and guards. This created a seamless hierarchy from the individual rider leading his spare horses up to the general commanding a tumen, all the way to the imperial official coordinating supply depots across continents. They all spoke the same organizational language. This uniformity became the secret to managing diversity. When the Mongols incorporated auxiliary troops from conquered territories, Armenian cavalry or Chinese engineers, they didn't force them to abandon all their own ways. Instead, they plugged these foreign units into the decimal framework as cohesive blocks. 1,000 Georgian lancers would be designated a mingan, given a Mongol overseer to liaise with high command, and then expected to manage their own logistics within that system. This turned a potential logistical nightmare, an army of dozens of cultures and languages, into a manageable, standardized force. The decimal system was the ultimate logistical algorithm, a piece of social code that allowed the empire to scale, adapt, and sustain itself across the greatest distances history had ever seen. But the ultimate proof of this network lay in its ability to bring down a civilization's beating heart. The Siege of Baghdad in 1258 was not a chaotic raid. It was a meticulously orchestrated logistical operation, the final exam for an empire that had mastered the art of moving mountains to crush a city. For years, Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis, prepared. His army was a testament to the Mongol talent for assimilation, a multi-ethnic force featuring not just steppe cavalry, but tens of thousands of conscripts and specialists from across their already conquered territories. The true challenge was not assembling soldiers, but transporting the means to break one of the world's most formidable sets of walls. This required an unprecedented siege train. Engineers from China, experts in building massive counterweight trebuchets, were marched across Asia. metalworkers from Persia, skilled in forging the components of powerful bolt throwers, joined the column. The logistical caravan for this campaign was a mobile industrial complex, carrying disassembled siege engines, barrels of naphtha for fire weapons, and the specialized tools needed to reconstruct it all on the banks of the Tigris. They secured their lines of communication and supply back through Persia, ensuring a steady flow of materials and food to sustain a potentially lengthy blockade. Then they performed a feat of military engineering that stunned the defenders. Using the Great Tigris River itself as a highway, the Mongols floated prefabricated siege towers and bridge components right to the city's watery gates, turning the river that gave Baghdad life into an avenue for its siege. The isolation was total. For weeks, the Mongol network tightened its grip, cutting every land route and river channel that supplied the metropolis. Inside the walls, the caliph's forces, though brave, faced an enemy that had turned the surrounding landscape into a fortified workshop, a hive of industry sustained from hundreds of miles away. When the final assault came, it was delivered with chilling precision, the product of years of planning and global resource extraction. The fall of Baghdad sent a shockwave through the medieval world, not merely because of its scale, but because of its method. It demonstrated that the Mongol system could now project not just cavalry, but sustained, technical, industrial-grade force over continental distances. They had evolved from masters of the open plain to masters of the fortified city, and their network was the scaffold upon which that evolution was built. This was the grim, undeniable conclusion of their logistical revolution. If they could reduce the jewel of Islam, no city on earth was beyond their reach. Yet for all its continental reach, the Mongol network finally met an element it could not fully master: the open sea. Under Kublai Khan, the empire that had conquered on horseback dared to dream of conquest by sail, launching two colossal and ultimately doomed invasions, one against Japan and another against the island of Java. These ambitious campaigns reveal a fascinating paradox: the astonishing adaptability of their logistical machine and the stark geographic limits that ultimately defined it. To project power across water, Kublai Khan did what the Mongols always did. He mobilized the resources of conquered peoples on a staggering scale. For the invasions of Japan, he commanded the shipyards of Korea and southern China to build an armada of hundreds, perhaps even thousands, of vessels. It was a breathtaking feat of imperial logistics, a floating extension of the oortoo caravan. These ships were loaded with tens of thousands of troops, both Mongol and conscripted Chinese, along with their horses, grain, and weapons, attempting to transplant an entire army across the sea. But the sea operated by different rules than the steppe. The Mongols were masters of reading the land, of knowing where the next pasture or mountain pass lay. The ocean, however, was a trackless and unforgiving map. Naval navigation, the timing of campaigns around unpredictable monsoon winds, and the very art of shipbuilding were skills outside their nomadic heritage. They were reliant on the often reluctant expertise of their subjugated sailors and shipwrights, creating a chain of command and competence far more fragile than their land-based systems. The legendary kamikaze or divine wind, the typhoons that shattered the Mongol fleets in 1274 and 1281, were not merely bad weather. They were the catastrophic endpoint of a logistical overreach. Those storms did not just scatter ships, they annihilated the entire carefully assembled supply line in a matter of hours, drowning the troops, animals, and provisions that had taken years to marshal. On land, a defeated army could retreat and regroup. Its supply caravans could turn around. On the sea, there was no retreat, only total loss. The failed invasion of Java further illustrated this disconnect. While initially successful in landing forces, the campaign stretched the Mongol system across an immense maritime distance into a tropical environment for which it had no reference. The logistical tail, the lifeline back to the mainland, became impossibly long and vulnerable. Facing guerrilla resistance and unfamiliar diseases, the expeditionary force found itself isolated, unable to leverage the steady, sustaining flow of resources that was its signature advantage on land. These maritime ventures highlight a profound truth about the Mongol system. Its genius was intrinsically linked to the continental geography of Eurasia, to the very rhythms of the steppe, the desert, and the river valley. It was a network built for a world of connected landmasses, where horses could relay messages and ox carts could crawl from one horizon to the next. The ocean represented a fundamental rupture in that continuity, a highway they could not easily patrol or provision. Their strength was in turning distance into a weapon, but the sea introduced a form of distance that their technology and cultural experience could not yet bridge. The kamikaze was more than a storm, it was the sound of a logistical model meeting its absolute limit. The conquests created a paradox of profound peace. By imposing their brutal order, the Mongols inadvertently forged an era of unprecedented stability across the entire continent, a period historians call the Pax Mongolica. This was not a time of gentle peace, but a peace enforced by the absolute, terrifying power of the steppe. And from this enforced stability bloomed an unexpected miracle, the greatest explosion of trade and cultural exchange the world had ever seen. The very same Yam routes that once carried only military dispatches now hummed with a different kind of traffic. Caravans of merchants, their camels laden with silk, spices, porcelain, and gems, traveled these protected highways from the shores of the Mediterranean to the capital of China. The Mongols, pragmatic to their core, realized that a thriving merchant class was not a threat but an asset. They actively policed the major trade routes, hunting down bandits that had plagued the Silk Road for centuries. They introduced standardized weights and measures and clear, predictable taxes on goods, replacing the chaotic, arbitrary tolls of 100 local lords. For the first time, a merchant could plan a journey from Venice to Beijing with a reasonable expectation of safety and a known cost. This was the birth of the true Silk Road superhighway. The most famous traveler to ride this wave was a young Venetian named Marco Polo. His incredible journey and the book that followed were only possible because he moved within the protective shell of the Mongol logistical empire. The Yam stations that once served only imperial couriers now offered shelter and fresh mounts to accredited merchants carrying the right Paiza. The Mongols did not just allow this commerce, they actively cultivated it, offering loans to trading ventures and even exempting important merchants from taxes. Why would a nomadic empire of warriors care so much about the price of pepper or the flow of Persian carpets? The answer reveals the full, circular genius of their system. A thriving Silk Road became the economic engine that powered the military machine. Every caravan that moved meant a flow of silver and gold into Mongol coffers through taxation, wealth that directly funded further campaigns and maintained the vast Yam network itself. More importantly, these caravans were rivers of intelligence. The gossip of a spice trader in a Samarkand tavern, the observations of a jeweler in a Konbalik market, all this information flowed back to the Mongol authorities along the same routes as the goods. The commercial network became a sprawling, self-funding intelligence grid, but the benefits went even deeper. This constant exchange brought global innovations directly to the Mongol court. Persian astronomical charts, Chinese medical texts, European metalworking techniques all moved freely along the secure routes. The Mongols, always eager to adopt anything useful, absorbed these ideas, further enhancing their own administrative and technological prowess. The Pax Mongolica demonstrates that they understood logistics in its broadest, most modern sense. It was not merely about moving soldiers and arrows. It was about the integrated movement of all valuable things, information, soldiers, goods, and ideas. their empire became the world's first truly integrated economic zone, where the safe, efficient flow of commerce was not a separate concern from governance, but its very foundation. The highways built for conquest had become the arteries of a connected world, proving that the control of movement in all its forms is the ultimate form of power. To grasp the sheer scale of their achievement, we must place their system beside its contemporaries. Picture a European feudal army assembling for a campaign. It was not a single, cohesive force, but a collection of individual lords, each arriving with his own retinue of knights and foot soldiers, his own banner, and his own ideas about strategy. Coordination was a constant negotiation, a fragile alliance of proud, often rivalrous nobles. This army moved at the speed of its slowest element, the heavy wagons carrying the knight's armor, the personal luxuries of the nobility, and whatever grain could be hastily gathered. Its campaign season was dictated by the harvest and the weather, a summer affair that ended when the autumn rains turned roads to mud. For supply, it relied overwhelmingly on foraging, a polite term for taking food from the local peasantry by force. This practice, called living off the land, was a double-edged sword. It allowed the army to move without a massive baggage train, but it also ravaged the very territories it was meant to control, turning potential subjects into desperate enemies and limiting how far the army could venture from fertile, populated lands. Every day was a race against starvation and desertion. Their communication was limited to the speed of a single rider on a single horse, carrying messages between fragmented commands that often had little idea what the other was doing. This was not a system designed for distance or endurance. It was a blunt instrument for regional conflict. Now hold that image in your mind and place the Mongol system next to it. The contrast is not merely one of style, but of fundamental design philosophy. Where the European force was an assemblage, the Mongol army was a single organism. Its decimal command structure eliminated feudal bickering, creating a clear, unbroken chain of command from the Great Khan down to the unit of 10. Its movement was not tied to seasons, but engineered for them, using frozen rivers as highways and winter itself as a weapon. Its supply was not a desperate scramble, but a calculated science, blending the personal sustenance of each rider with the massive, organized support of the oortoo caravans. This army did not forage in a haphazard, destructive manner. It drew from a network of pre-arranged depots and its own portable resources. Most crucially, its communication was not a hopeful gamble, but a guaranteed sprint. The Yam Relay system provided something no European commander could even dream of: real-time strategic coordination across a continent. A Mongol general on the Danube could receive updated orders from Karakorum in the time it took a European lord to muster his men from a neighboring province. This comparison reveals the core of the Mongol revolution. Their true weapon was not merely the composite bow, though it was fearsome, or the toughness of the steppe pony, though it was legendary. Their ultimate advantage was a holistic system of sustainment. They had solved the ancient riddle of military power: how to project force further, faster, and for longer than any opponent. The European model was inherently disruptive, consuming the landscape it moved through like a wildfire. The Mongol model was sustaining, carrying its own landscape with it like a tide. One system was limited by the very world it sought to conquer. The other was designed to transform that world into a pathway. In a head-to-head conflict, it was not a battle of courage or even numbers. It was a clash between two entirely different ages of warfare. The medieval army, for all its armored brilliance, was operating on a logistical model that had changed little since the Romans. The Mongols were operating on a model the world would not see again until the age of railroads and telegraphs. They rendered their enemies not just defeated, but strategically obsolete, outpaced and outthought by a network that turned the vastness of Eurasia into a single, manageable battlefield. The highways of conquest left a far deeper imprint than any single battle. Long after the empire fractured, the logistical architecture it built continued to shape the destiny of continents. The Yam Relay system did not vanish with the last great Khan. Its principles of speed, relay stations, and state-controlled priority were meticulously studied and adopted. In Russia, the Yam evolved into the Yamskaya Gonba, a postal network that became the backbone of Tsarist administration for centuries, binding the vast expanses of Siberia to Moscow. In China, the Ming and later Qing dynasties inherited and refined the Mongol system, maintaining its courier roads as vital channels of imperial control. The very idea of a state-run, high-speed communication network, a concept so alien to medieval Europe, became a standard tool of governance across Eurasia, a direct legacy of steppe logistics. This infrastructure of movement did more than carry messages. It accelerated the flow of everything. The secure trade corridors of the Pax Mongolica became a superhighway for technology. Printing techniques developed in East Asia moved westward along these routes, influencing the later development of the printing press in Europe. The knowledge of gunpowder, once a Chinese curiosity, traveled the same roads, transforming the nature of warfare globally. Perhaps most profoundly, the networks enabled the movement of people and microbes on an unprecedented scale. The same caravans that carried silk and spices also carried unseen passengers. In the mid-14th century, the bacterium responsible for the Black Death found the perfect conditions for a pandemic, a continent connected by fast, protected trade routes. The disease spread with terrifying speed along the Mongol-maintained highways from Central Asia to the Crimea, and from there into Europe. This tragic chapter underscores a stark reality. The infrastructure built for control and commerce could also facilitate catastrophe, binding the world together in vulnerability as well as prosperity. On a human level, this era of forced integration stirred the genetic and cultural landscape of Eurasia. The mass movements of soldiers, administrators, artisans, and slaves led to population mixing on a scale not seen since the ancient migrations. Genetic studies of modern populations across Central Asia still reflect this period of intense connectivity, a silent echo of the empire's demographic reshuffling. Culturally, the exchange was electric. Persian astronomers found work in Chinese observatories. Tibetan Buddhist monks debated with Islamic scholars in the courts of the Ilkhanate. European missionaries like John of Montecorvino traveled to Konbalik hoping to convert the Great Khan, and in the process carried stories of the East back home. Religions, art, culinary traditions, and scientific ideas circulated with the freedom that only safe passage can provide. In the end, the Mongol Empire can be understood as history's most ambitious logistical project. Its primary achievement was not merely the territory seized, but the connections forged. By brute force and brilliant administration, they compressed the vastness of a continent, shrinking the effective distance between cultures. They proved that the infrastructure of movement, the humble relay station, the organized caravan, the protected passport, could alter the course of human history as decisively as any army. The battles determined who ruled, but the network they built determined what ideas, what goods, and what futures would flow between East and West for centuries to come. The world that emerged from the Mongol era was, for the first time, a truly interconnected world, its map redrawn not just by borders, but by the invisible, enduring pathways of exchange. The word horde itself is a linguistic trap, a European mishearing that echoes through the centuries. Outsiders heard the Mongol term oortoo, meaning a royal camp or headquarters, and transformed it into a label for a mindless, swarming mass. But to step into an oortoo during a campaign was to witness the very opposite of chaos. It was a mobile city, a masterclass in portable urban planning. The great tent of the Khan stood at the precise center, a symbol of cosmic and earthly order. Radiating out from it in a strict, predetermined grid were the tents of commanders, administrators, and honored allies. Beyond them lay the functional districts, the bustling markets where smiths repaired weapons, the carefully segregated pens for thousands of horses, sheep, and cattle, and the storage areas for the oortoo supply caravans. This was not a random collection of nomads, it was a traveling capital, its layout designed for efficiency, security, and control. Every person, every animal, and every wagon had its assigned place, a system that could be packed up, moved hundreds of miles, and reassembled in a matter of hours, always in the same orderly pattern. Their famous speed was not reckless abandon, it was the product of this profound, ingrained discipline. A campaign began not with a sudden charge, but with a council of war where intelligence from the Yam network was analyzed, routes were debated, and objectives were clearly defined. Movements were coordinated through a system of flags, smoke signals, and couriers, ensuring separate army corps, sometimes operating hundreds of miles apart, acted in concert toward a shared strategic goal. The idea of random pillaging is another myth that collapses under scrutiny. While terror was certainly a weapon, its application was often chillingly tactical. A city that surrendered quickly and agreed to provide supplies and tribute might be spared the worst. A city that resisted could face a severe response, a calculated demonstration meant to persuade the next 10 cities on the route to open their gates without a fight. This was not mindless violence, it was a brutal form of economic and psychological efficiency, designed to minimize long sieges and preserve the momentum of the campaign. Their entire approach was one of systems thinking. They were not just warriors, they were auditors, cartographers, and quartermasters on a continental scale. They conducted censuses of conquered populations to determine tax yields and conscript quotas. They mapped routes not just for armies, but for the merchants who would follow, ensuring the economic engine kept running. To reduce them to a simple horde is to miss the forest for the trees, to focus on the flash of the sword and ignore the quiet, relentless hum of the network that made every swing possible. By seeing them as the supreme logisticians they were, we solved the central mystery of their rise. How did a people from the steppe conquer the world? They didn't just fight it, they organized it. Behind every army on the march stood a silent, sustaining force, one often written out of the traditional chronicles of conquest. While the riders and their horses dominate the story, the entire Mongol logistical system rested on a foundation managed not on the battlefield, but in the home camps by the women of the steppe. Their role was not one of indirect support, but of direct and essential production, the very activity that transformed raw resources into the fuel for empire. When the men departed on campaigns that could last for years, the entire responsibility for sustaining the nomadic society fell to those who remained. These home bases, known as oorls, were not passive waiting places. They were bustling economic hubs, and at their center was the jur, the felt tent that was both home and factory. Here, women oversaw the vast herds of sheep, goats, and cattle, the living capital of the nomadic world. The management of these animals through seasonal migrations, ensuring their health and growth, was a monumental task of logistics in itself, one that directly translated into future food and materials for the army. But their work went far beyond herding. Inside the jur, the skills of survival became the arts of war supply. The wool from the flocks was cleaned, carded, and pressed into thick, durable sheets of felt. This felt was the empire's building material, used for the portable tents that housed soldiers, for insulating saddle blankets, and for protective covers on supply wagons. The hides of animals were meticulously tanned and worked into essential gear, sturdy boots for long marches, tough containers for water and arag, the fermented mare's milk, and the all-important ropes and harnesses for horses and oxen. Most critically, they mastered the science of food preservation. surplus milk was fermented or dried into hard, nutritious curds that could last for months. Meat was expertly sliced thin and air-dried into boards, that lightweight, protein-rich staple that filled the saddlebags of every warrior. Every piece of leather, every sheet of felt, every brick of dried cheese was a logistical component, manufactured on the domestic front and ready for collection when the next oortoo caravan passed through. This was not a separate domestic sphere. It was the primary production line for the military-industrial complex of the steppe. The entire system of conquest relied on this dual economy, where the work of the home camp was fully integrated into the engine of war. Without this steady, skilled output from the oars, the armies would have lacked the consistent, high-quality supplies that gave them such endurance. The line between the hearth and the campaign trail was not a border, but a continuous loop. In some extraordinary cases, women stepped beyond this vital production role into the highest realms of political logistics. Consider Sorgatoni Beki, the wife of Tolui and mother of Kublai Khan. After her husband's passing, she became the administrator of a vast appanage, a territory encompassing thousands of people and immense resources. She was renowned not for military command, but for her brilliant statecraft and managerial acumen. Sorgatoni skillfully managed alliances with rival Mongol princes, negotiated with foreign merchants and dignitaries, and oversaw the economic development of her lands. She ensured stability and prosperity on the home front, which in turn provided a secure base of supplies, wealth, and loyal troops for her son's ambitions. Her careful stewardship of resources and relationships was a form of high-level logistical planning, creating the political and economic conditions that enabled Kublai's eventual rise to become the great Khan of a unified empire. Her story illuminates a profound truth about Mongol power. It was a collective endeavor. The sustainability of their world-altering campaigns depended on a seamless partnership between the mobile army and the productive homeland, between the strategists on horseback and the managers in the jur. To overlook the role of women is to see only the arrow in flight, and to miss the skilled hands that crafted the bow, the string, and the very strength of the archer. The network, in its fullest sense, was woven from both the movements of men and the enduring labor of women, a partnership that turned the rhythms of nomadic life into the pulse of an empire. A cavalry charge is useless against 30 feet of stone. This was the great tactical paradox the Mongols faced as soon as they left the open steppe. Their mastery of movement and supply meant they could reach any city on the continent, but reaching it and capturing it were two very different challenges. A nomadic army built for speed and open field maneuver found itself staring up at the towering, silent walls of civilizations that had spent centuries perfecting the art of defense. To stop here would have meant their empire ended at the first fortified gate. Their response was not stubborn repetition, but a breathtaking campaign of intellectual assimilation. They turned their greatest weakness into a new strength by building a traveling university of siegecraft. When a city fell, among the first to be identified and spared were the engineers, the master carpenters, and the metalworkers. These specialists were not executed or ransomed. They were offered a stark choice: join the mobile machine or face the consequences. From the advanced workshops of northern China, they incorporated experts in the counterweight trebuchet, a weapon capable of hurling massive stones to shatter parapets and crush morale. From the Persian world, they adopted knowledge of tunneling and mining, the slow, deliberate work of undermining walls until they collapsed. This was not a haphazard collection of prisoners. It was a deliberate, systematic recruitment of the finest military technical minds across Eurasia. These men, along with their families and apprentices, became a permanent part of the Mongol logistical train. They traveled with the armies, a cerebral counterpart to the herds of horses and oxen. Their most valuable cargo was not in the wagons, but in their heads, the mental blueprints for engines of destruction. The logistical challenge then became one of translation. how to move the means of production for these complex machines across thousands of miles of grassland and desert. The solution was a form of medieval flat-pack engineering. Critical metal components, like the massive axle pins for trebuchets or the iron heads for battering rams, would be forged in advance at centralized imperial workshops. These heavy, durable parts would then be transported in the great oortoo caravans. The bulkier wooden elements, the long throwing arms and the frames, could be sourced and constructed on site from local timber, directed by the engineers who carried the precise specifications in their memory. This meant the army arrived not just with soldiers, but with a complete, if disassembled, siege workshop. Within days of setting up camp outside a defiant city, the landscape would transform. The sound of hammers and saws would replace the silence of the steppe as teams of conscripted laborers, supervised by the imported experts, began constructing the very instruments of the city's doom. The walls that had represented absolute security now looked out upon a growing forest of siege towers, catapults, and earthworks, all built with an efficiency that mirrored the Mongol supply lines. This ability to operationalize foreign expertise on demand reveals the deepest layer of their logistical genius. Their network was not just for moving things, it was for moving knowledge. It could identify a gap in capability, locate the world's best solution, transport that solution across continents, and deploy it at the precise point of need. This transformed the nature of their army itself. They were no longer just a cavalry force that avoided fortifications. They became a combined arms juggernaut that could select the perfect tool for any obstacle. A city behind a river might face a sudden Mongol fleet built by captured shipwrights. A fortress on a mountain might find its water source diverted by hydraulic engineers from Central Asia. There was no longer a single, static defense that could be considered safe. The Mongols had made adaptability itself a logistical discipline, ensuring that no wall, no matter how thick, could ever be a permanent barrier to their ambition. The very networks that forged unity ultimately revealed their fragility. A system designed for a single, commanding will could not survive its own success. As the empire expanded, the centrifugal forces of geography and ambition grew stronger. Following the death of Mongol Khan in 1259, a succession dispute erupted, fracturing the realm into four primary khanates: the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Yuan dynasty in China. These were not mere provinces, they were rival states, each ruled by a different branch of the imperial family, each with its own priorities and enemies. The first casualty of this division was the seamless flow that had defined Mongol power. The unified Yam system, that continental nervous system, now had borders running through it. A relay rider carrying a message from the Yuan court to the Ilkhanate could no longer demand a fresh horse with a golden Paiza. He was now a foreign courier, subject to negotiation, delay, or outright refusal. The once instantaneous communication between distant army corps slowed to a diplomatic crawl. The shared strategic vision evaporated, replaced by local conflicts and competing alliances. The Golden Horde and the Ilkhanate, for instance, fought a series of wars over the Caucasus, a tragic irony where the descendants of Genghis Khan turned the very tactics he perfected against each other. The logistical glue that had synchronized campaigns from Hungary to Korea had dried up. Without it, the empire's parts could no longer act in concert. They could only act against one another. This fragmentation was accelerated by a deeper cultural shift. In conquered lands like China and Persia, the Mongol elite gradually settled. They moved into palaces, adopted local customs, and began to govern as traditional sedentary rulers. From this new perspective, the immense cost of maintaining the Yam network, with its thousands of stations, horses, and personnel, began to look less like an investment in power and more like a burdensome relic of a nomadic past. The mobile lifestyle, the very engine of their initial advantage, was seen as archaic by administrators now focused on taxing farmland and managing cities. The network required not just money but a shared nomadic ethos, a cultural commitment to mobility and connection that weakened with each generation spent within city walls. Then came a blow no system could withstand. In the mid-14th century, the bacterium responsible for the Black Death traveled the very trade routes the Mongols had made safe. The pandemic devastated populations along the Silk Road, striking at the human infrastructure of the empire. Station masters, couriers, caravan drivers, and the farmers who supplied the yam posts fell ill in vast numbers. The routes of commerce and communication became routes of desolation, disrupting the movement of goods, information, and taxes. The great caravans grew scarce, and the relay stations fell silent, not from political decree but from catastrophic loss. The decline was not a sudden military collapse, but a slow unraveling of the interconnected web. It demonstrated a profound historical truth. The most sophisticated system is only as strong as the unity and purpose that sustains it. The network that built the empire was its greatest strength, but it was also its central vulnerability. It required a centralized authority to command it, a shared culture to maintain it, and a stable population to staff it. When those pillars crumbled, the connections that held a continent together simply faded, leaving behind separate kingdoms and a legacy etched not in lasting borders, but in the indelible pathways of exchange they had carved across the world. A golden Paiza carried by a courier across the steppe functioned on the same core principle as a data packet traveling the internet today. Both are systems built not on a single, fragile line, but on a resilient, interconnected web. The Mongol Yam, with its chain of relay stations ensuring a message could find multiple paths to its destination, is a startlingly clear prototype for the packet-switched networks that form the backbone of our digital world. In both systems, information is broken down, moves in rapid hops between nodes, and is reassembled at its endpoint, a design that prioritizes speed and survivability over a single, vulnerable connection. The medieval station master handing off a scroll to a fresh rider is performing the same essential function as a modern router passing along a stream of data, each one a critical link in a chain of trust and efficiency. This conceptual leap, developed on the grasslands 8 centuries ago, reveals that the architecture of connection follows timeless logical patterns, regardless of the technology that enables it. This parallel extends into the realm of command and control. The Mongols' fusion of real-time intelligence from scouts and merchants with the rapid decision-making enabled by the Yam created a feedback loop of astonishing speed for its era. A general could receive a report, analyze the situation, and issue new orders that would reach distant units in days. This integrated system of seeing, deciding, and acting is the direct ancestor of what modern militaries term command, control, and communications, or C3. The goal is identical: to create what strategists call a shorter OOD loop, the cycle of observe, orient, decide, and act than your opponent. The Mongols achieved this with horses and fire signals, compressing the decision-making timeline for entire continents and consistently outmaneuvering slower reacting adversaries. Their strategic advantage came from a network that processed information as effectively as it moved soldiers. Even their system of authority finds a digital counterpart. The Paiza was more than a passport, it was a physical authentication token. Its material and inscriptions verified the bearer's priority level and granted specific access rights to the network's resources, a golden Paiza clearing all obstacles. In our world, this is mirrored by digital certificates, encryption keys, and quality-of-service protocols that authenticate users and prioritize certain types of data traffic across the internet. An urgent video call is given a digital Paiza, so to speak, ensuring it moves swiftly through congested networks, while less critical data waits. The principle of verified, tiered access to a shared infrastructure is a cornerstone of both systems, proving that managing flow requires managing identity and privilege. The echoes continue in the economic sphere. The Mongols did not just protect the Silk Road, they weaponized it, understanding that commerce was a source of intelligence, revenue, and political leverage. They actively shaped trade flows to strengthen their empire and weaken rivals. Today, nations engage in similar strategic calculations, but we call it supply chain security or economic statecraft. The focus on securing rare earth mineral supplies, building resilient manufacturing networks, or using trade policy as a tool of geopolitical influence are all modern expressions of that same ancient insight, that control over the pathways of vital resources is a profound form of power. The caravan routes of the 13th century have been replaced by global shipping lanes, fiber optic cables, and semiconductor supply chains, but the game remains fundamentally the same. Ultimately, studying the Mongol network is not an exercise in antiquarian curiosity. It is a lesson in timeless human challenges. How do you maintain cohesion across vast distances? How do you move vital resources reliably through uncertain terrain? How do you make good decisions faster than your competition? Their answers, crafted from felt, leather, and horseflesh, were conceptually revolutionary. They built a system that thought in networks long before the word had its modern meaning. Their legacy whispers to us that our own world of instant communication and global logistics did not emerge from a vacuum. It is the latest iteration of an ancient pursuit, the relentless human drive to conquer distance, not with sheer force, but with the elegant, invisible power of connection. The chronicles of conquest are written in ink, but the story of the network is found in fragments. How can we truly know the scale and sophistication of a system built on speed, designed to leave as little permanent trace as possible? Our knowledge is not drawn from a single grand archive, but assembled like a mosaic, each piece a different color and texture, brought together to form a complete picture. From the east, we have the meticulous bureaucrats of the Yuan dynasty. Their administrative records, written with the precision of a vast imperial machine, detail the exact organization of the post stations. They list the numbers of horses and oxen maintained at each relay point, the rations allotted to couriers, and the specific families assigned to provide service. This is the view from the command center, the spreadsheet of empire. From the Persian world, we gain the perspective of the court historian. Scholars like Rashid al-Din and Juvayni, who served under the Mongol Ilkhans, wrote sweeping chronicles. They described the establishment of the Yam not with dry numbers, but with narrative awe, documenting its role in binding the realm and the awe it inspired in foreign visitors. Their accounts provide the political and strategic context, the why behind the logistical machine. Then there is the view from the road, the wide-eyed traveler. Marco Polo's famous description, for all its embellishments, offers something priceless, a European merchant's first-hand encounter with the system's everyday reality. He writes of the way stations spaced a day's journey apart, the fresh horses ready at a moment's notice, and the incredible distances a message could travel. His testimony bridges the gap between official record and lived experience, showing us the network in motion through the eyes of someone who used it. But texts can only tell us so much. The silent testimony of the land itself completes the story. Across the steppes of Mongolia and the deserts of Central Asia, archaeologists have identified the faint, stubborn footprints of the Yam. Sometimes it is a simple cairn of stones marking a route. In other places, the foundations of a small compound emerge from the earth, the outlines of stables and storerooms. Scattered around these sites, artifacts surface, a broken ceramic vessel that once held water for a thirsty rider, a rusted horseshoe, or a piece of harness fitting. These physical remnants are the network's fossil record. Most evocative of all are the Paiza tablets themselves. Several of these passports of power have survived, discovered in museum collections or even unearthed by chance. To hold one is to hold a piece of the system's authority. The weight of the metal, the clarity of the inscription, they make the abstract concept of imperial priority suddenly, tangibly real. Each source, whether a line in a chronicle, a stone foundation, or a golden tablet, is a single thread. Historians and archaeologists are the weavers, carefully intertwining these threads to reconstruct the magnificent tapestry of the Mongol network. It is a reminder that some of history's most powerful innovations leave behind not towering cathedrals, but patterns etched in movement and efficiency, a ghostly imprint on the landscape that whispers of a continent once connected by the relentless rhythm of hooves and the unwavering passage of imperial will. This genius of connection casts a long and complex shadow. The very efficiency we have traced, the brilliant networks of speed and supply, were not abstract systems of management. They were the steel tendons of a machine built for one overwhelming purpose: conquest on a continental scale. And conquest in the 13th century was not a bloodless affair. The fall of Baghdad stands as a stark monument to this reality, a city of legendary learning and culture that faced a devastating outcome after its defiance. Here we encounter history's most challenging paradox, the intimate link between logistical brilliance and immense human hardship. The Mongols understood terror not merely as an outburst of violence, but as a calculated component of their strategy. A city that resisted and was met with a severe response served as a lesson to the next 10 cities along the route. This was, in the coldest logistical terms, an efficiency calculation. A single, brutal demonstration could prevent a dozen costly, time-consuming sieges, preserving the army's strength and momentum. It turned fear into a fuel that propelled the war machine forward, reducing future resource expenditure. This forces us to sit with an uncomfortable truth. The advancement of a system, the sheer genius of its organization, does not walk hand in hand with moral progress. The Mongol networks were amoral, powerful tools that served the expansion of power, full stop. Their legacy is thus irrevocably dual, a tapestry woven with threads of awe-inspiring achievement and profound suffering. To study them is to be asked to hold two immense truths in tension, to admire the architecture of the network while never looking away from the purposes it was designed to serve. This is not a dilemma with a simple resolution, but a necessary tension for anyone seeking to understand the past in full. It reminds us that the pathways of progress are rarely straight, and that the engines of history are often driven by forces of both creation and destruction, intertwined in ways that defy easy judgment. The story of the Mongol system, therefore, is not just a tale of how they moved, but a meditation on why they moved, and the world-altering consequences that flowed from those movements in every direction. The principles that moved armies across continents can also move a modern organization toward its goals. At the heart of the Mongol achievement was a leadership philosophy that understood power not as a personal attribute, but as a function of a well-designed system. The first and most vital lesson is the absolute priority of clear communication. The Yam Relay was not a luxury, it was the empire's circulatory system. In any large team or company today, the equivalent is the flow of information. When decisions stall in bureaucratic layers, when departments operate in silos unaware of each other's work, or when feedback from the front lines never reaches decision makers, the organization becomes slow, clumsy, and blind. The Mongols institutionalized speed and clarity, building dedicated channels where priority messages could bypass all obstruction. For a leader, this means designing processes that ensure critical information travels fast and true, empowering people with the knowledge they need to act with confidence and alignment. It is about building your own yam, whatever that looks like in your context, to keep the whole organism responsive. Their second masterstroke was organizational design, the elegant simplicity of the decimal system. By structuring their forces in units of 10, 100, and 1,000, they created a framework that was both scalable and accountable. Each unit leader knew his people, his resources, and his exact responsibilities. This modular design prevented the chaos of a monolithic, faceless mass. In a modern setting, this translates to the power of small, empowered teams. When individuals are organized into coherent units with clear autonomy and direct accountability, they can adapt quickly to challenges without waiting for orders from a distant central command. It is the difference between a rigid hierarchy that cracks under pressure and a resilient network of teams that can reorganize, support each other, and drive forward even when parts of the plan change. The structure itself becomes a leadership tool, distributing initiative and ownership throughout the entire organization. Perhaps their most striking lesson is a ruthless pragmatism toward innovation. The Mongols had no cultural pride that prevented them from adopting a better way. When they encountered a problem their steppe traditions could not solve, like towering city walls, they immediately sought the world's best solution and integrated it. They found the experts, gave them the tools and authority, and made their knowledge a core competency. This is a powerful model for any leader facing disruption. It asks, where are our weaknesses? Who outside our organization has already solved this? How can we bring that skill in-house, not as a temporary fix, but as a permanent upgrade to our capabilities? It is a mindset that values utility over tradition, and that sees every new piece of knowledge as a potential lever for greater effectiveness. Finally, their entire system was grounded in profound situational awareness. Before a single soldier moved, scouts mapped the terrain and merchants gathered intelligence on political rifts and economic conditions. They never entered a situation blind. For a leader, this underscores that no strategy, however brilliant on paper, can succeed without a deep, nuanced understanding of the environment. What are the unseen currents in your market or field? Who are the real influencers, and what do they truly want? What are the hidden obstacles, the equivalent of that desert without water or that river that freezes in winter? Great decisions are made not from an isolated office, but from a position of rich, continuous learning about the landscape you operate within. The Mongols teach us that strategy is intelligence in motion. Ultimately, the empire's endurance reveals that charismatic authority is fleeting, but systemic resilience is enduring. Genghis Khan was a formidable figure, but the empire lasted generations beyond him because he and his successors built something more powerful than any single leader, a set of interconnected systems for communication, supply, and innovation. True leadership, then, is less about being the central command and more about being the chief architect, designing the reliable, responsive networks that allow every person in the organization to contribute their best toward a common horizon. The legacy of the steppe is a reminder that the greatest achievements are built not by heroes working alone, but by communities moving in sync, guided by systems that turn collective effort into world-changing momentum. Yet for all we have reconstructed, the past holds its secrets close. We can map the yam stations and list the contents of a caravan, but the living, breathing reality of these systems remains just out of reach. What was the precise rhythm of a day at a remote relay post? A courier arrives at a gallop as the sun touches the horizon. Does the station master simply hand over a horse, or is there a rapid exchange of verbal reports, a quick scan of the Paiza, a shared bowl of broth before the rider vanishes again into the gathering dark? The ledgers tell us how many horses were kept, but not the smell of the stable, the quiet conversations between the families tasked with this duty for generations, or the tension of waiting for news from a front 1,000 miles away. These human textures are lost to us, the granular details that transformed a logistical node into a place of lived experience. Similarly, the coordination of a massive oortoo caravan, stretching for miles across the open steppe, presents a profound puzzle. Without radios or telegraphs, how did the front wagons communicate with the rear? How did they navigate complex terrain, ford rivers, or respond to a sudden storm? The answer likely lies in a combination of practiced signals, perhaps flags by day and lanterns by night, and a deep, ingrained understanding of the route and the pace. Each drover and guard would have known their place in a moving organism, their role as instinctive as breathing, but the precise choreography, the real-time adjustments made across that vast, slow-moving column, is a silent ballet we can only imagine. Even their famed environmental mastery had its limits. The kamikaze typhoons that shattered the invasion fleets of Japan raise a haunting question. The Mongols possessed incredible weather intelligence for the continent, reading the steppe winds and winter freezes like a map. But did their network of informants include sailors who understood the Pacific's moods? Were there attempts to predict the timing of those fatal storms? And if so, why did they fail? This gap hints at the boundaries of their knowledge empire, a frontier where their terrestrial network met a chaotic maritime world it could not yet decode. These are not trivial curiosities. They are the missing pieces in our understanding of how this machine truly functioned at the human level. Fortunately, the investigation is far from over. Today, archaeologists are not just digging in the obvious places. They are using satellite imagery to spot the faint, geometric outlines of what might be winter camps or staging grounds, invisible to the naked eye on the ground. Careful excavations at these sites are uncovering the residue of daily life, the hearths where meals were cooked, the post holes for temporary corrals, and the discarded fragments of tools. Each shard of pottery, each animal bone analyzed for cut marks, adds a sentence to the story. In laboratories, scientists are conducting genetic studies on ancient horse remains recovered from Mongol-era sites. By tracing lineages, they hope to pinpoint the breeding centers for the legendary steppe pony and map how these vital animals were dispersed across the empire, providing a biological map of logistical support. Meanwhile, historians continue to scour archives, finding new mentions of the network in overlooked texts, from tax records to personal letters, that offer fleeting glimpses into its operation. Each of these discoveries, whether from a satellite orbiting the Earth or a scanner reading ancient DNA, acts as a tuning device. It sharpens our model, moving us from broad strokes to finer detail. It reminds us that history is not a dusty, completed ledger. It is an ongoing conversation between the past and the present, a detective story where the clues are often hidden in the soil, in a strand of genetic code, or in a single word on a fragile manuscript page. The story of the Mongol network, therefore, is still being written. Every season in the field, every new technological lens applied to old evidence, has the potential to rewrite a paragraph, to answer one of these lingering whispers from the steppe. The empire's greatest legacy may be this, an endless invitation to look closer, to piece together the magnificent and intricate clockwork of a world connected by will, by horse, and by an idea whose full dimensions we are still striving to see. The echoes of those galloping hooves have faded into the wind, but the shape they left on the world remains. From the relay stations of the Yam to the disciplined chaos of the Nerge hunt, we have journeyed through the hidden infrastructure that made an empire possible. This story reveals a fundamental truth. The Mongol conquests were not a product of mysterious barbarian fury, but of calculated, systematic mastery over the movement of information, supplies, and people across the vast canvas of Eurasia. They were not just warriors, they were architects of flow, building networks where others saw only empty distance. Their true monument was not a city of stone, but a continent connected by purpose. The golden Paiza, the felt ger rolling on its cart, the scout's signal fire on a distant hill, these were the components of a new kind of power, one built on connection rather than mere domination. Their legacy is a profound testament to the power of networks, how linking points across a great expanse can create a force far greater than the sum of its individual parts. By turning the endless steppe into a superhighway and the rhythms of nomadic life into a campaign manual, they demonstrated that the greatest strength lies not in the sword, but in the system that delivers it. As we navigate our own world of global supply chains and instant digital communication, the Mongol example stands as an ancient yet strikingly relevant lesson. It reminds us that the challenges of coordination, resilience, and strategic speed are timeless. The principles of clear communication, modular organization, and adaptive learning that fueled their engine are the very principles that drive innovation and strategy today. The steppe may seem a world away, but the logic that ruled it, the relentless pursuit of efficiency through connection, is woven into the fabric of our modern existence. Their story invites us to look beyond the surface of history, to see the invisible frameworks that enable great change. If you found this deep dive into history's greatest logistical puzzle fascinating, we would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What parallels do you see between their network and our own? And for more journeys into the hidden architectures of our past, be sure to subscribe. The mysteries are waiting.